Hey, what's up, everybody? True Boxing here. Thank you for coming back to Get Hit with the Truth. So today we are doing the Boxing Awards, the 2022 Boxing Awards. These are the last of all my, videos about 2022. We're going to knock out all these awards. This one is the award for the most controversial fight of the year. How I handle that is I'm going to give candidates from all the divisions combined under 122, then from 122 all the way to heavyweight if there is a candidate. So basically most controversial, I'll break that down. Basically what most controversial means to me is a fight that it was razor thin, that a lot of people thought could have went either way, or majority is a fight that people thought one guy won. More people thought one guy won than the other one. And like last year, I believe my most controversial might have been Charlo and Castaño, their first fight, because there was a lot of people that thought, a lot more people that thought Castaño won than Charlo. But, you know, that to me is kind of the definition of a controversial fight, or to me, the most controversial fight in boxing, you know, for me in my era that I've ever seen was the Tim Bradley bullshit victory that he had over Pacquiao in the first fight. I mean, and I was pulling for Bradley in that fight. So you can't say that I'm a Pacquiao fanboy. Not at all. I was actually pulling for Tim Bradley, and I thought Pacquiao beat his ass about 11 to 12 rounds. So that's the kind of definition I'm talking about. So let's jump into it. Let's start looking at our candidates. Under 122, I only look at the bigger fights under 122 pounds. I don't break down each division individually like I do from 122 to heavyweight. For me, I didn't really have a candidate there. I kind of looked at some of them. Nothing really seemed too controversial, so I left that alone. 122, super bantamweight. I didn't have a candidate here. There wasn't a lot of action in terms of big fights at 122, and there really wasn't any controversial fights that were really close enough to call controversial, so I didn't do that either at 122. I have two candidates at 126 though, and the first one is Gary Russell Jr. against Mark Magsayo for the WBC featherweight title. That fight took place in January. It was, Magsayo started off, throwing more punches, and then Gary Russell injured himself in the third or fourth round. And then in the second half of the fight, it looked like Magsayo pretty much won most of the first half. But in the second half, he started to slow down. Gary Russell, even with one arm, started doing more, and, he really closed the gap, made the fight really close. And there were some people that thought that he won the fight. It was close. He ended up losing a majority decision. So that is my first candidate at 126. Next up is Isaac Dogboe versus Joet Gonzalez. This was a razor-thin fight. I mean, these two guys went to war for 10 rounds in an eliminator. Really good back-and-forth fight. And there were some that thought Gonzalez won the fight. So that, to me, is controversial right there. It wasn't a huge one, but it was enough to make my list. 130 really didn't have a candidate for controversial. Everything was pretty clear-cut. There wasn't a lot of controversial fights there, or any that were worth a note. 135, the candidate was Vasily Lomachenko against Jermaine Ortiz. Ortiz came in a heavy underdog, and, he ended up boxing really well. He actually was winning the first half of the fight. Most people were giving him the rounds, and then Lomachenko closed the fight strong in the second half and won a very close unanimous decision. But there were some that thought Ortiz won the fight. So this one was my candidate for lightweight, most controversial. Now I have three candidates for controversial at 140. The first is Josh Taylor versus Jack Catterall for the undisputed junior welterweight championship. This one, Josh Taylor was a heavy favorite going in. Nobody thought he was going to lose. Catterall was a mandatory #1 contender and undefeated, but nobody gave him a chance in hell. He fought his ass off and even scored a knockdown. Taylor made it somewhat close, but when they went to the scorecards, everybody was blown away that Taylor got a unanimous decision. Almost everybody thought Catterall won this fight, so very controversial decision right here. Next Next up was Teofimo Lopez against Sandor Martin. Lopez came in a big favorite here. He had debuted in August and got a victory, and then in December he was supposed to fight Jose Pedraza. Pedraza suffered an injury, and Sandor Martin stepped in on about 4 or 5 weeks notice, I think. And you know, I thought it was going to be a decent fight, and it was that, but it was a lot closer than most were expecting. And you know, when it came down, Lopez walked away with I think it was a split decision, but Martin was just appalled at the decision. There were some people that thought Martin won. It was very close, so that made my list. And then the last one was Alberto Puello versus Batir Akhmadov, as they competed for the vacant WBA championship in August. This was just a back and forth, very good toe-to-toe fight that really could have went either way. It was really action-packed, back and forth. I called it controversial because I like maybe half, maybe more. I thought Akhmadov did enough to win the fight. I thought he won, but you know, it was that close. So it was controversial. 147, 154, and 160. I really didn't see any controversial fights there. There wasn't a lot of fights that, 147 personally just didn't have a lot of fights, period. Especially big ones that, you know, make the list for controversial. 154, kind of the same thing. There were just a lot of guys getting clear-cut victories, and 160 didn't have a lot of action either. So not a lot of controversy between those two divisions, so no candidates. 168, it was Daniel Jacobs versus John Ryder. This is another one of those good fights where Jacobs was outboxing Ryder through the first half. He, won most of it. Then in the second half, Ryder closed the gap. Jacobs slowed down, especially in the championship rounds, like rounds 10, 11, and 12, and Ryder was able to close the gap enough. It went to the scorecards, could have went either way, and John Ryder walked away with a split decision victory, in the biggest of his career. So it was controversial. So, because there was a lot of people that thought Jacobs won. So it was close though. 175, another one I didn't have any a candidate. 200 pounds cruiserweight, I had two. The first was Ilunga Makabu versus Tabiso Mashunu in their rematch for the WBC title. This fight took place in January. There, at the time, it was being talked that the winner was going to get a crack, potentially get a crack at Canelo, so there was a lot on the line. And Makabu had knocked Mashunu out about 7 years earlier, but Mashunu was coming in poised, hot, and he went in there and boxed well. And there was a lot of people, I didn't see the fight personally, but there's a lot of people that thought Mashunu deserved the decision and that he got robbed. He ended up losing a split decision to Makabu, and Makabu held on to the WBC title. Also, the other candidate at cruiserweight was Badou Jack versus Richard Rivera. It was a good fight. Rivera was undefeated, but widely unknown. And he went in there and fought his ass off against Badou Jack. First half of the fight he looked good, and then the old Badou Jack who really shows up in the second half of the fight, closed the fight strong and went to the scorecards after 10. Badou Jack walked away with a 10-round split decision, but there were a lot of people that felt Rivera could have won. So that's the other candidate. And then the final candidate was Andy Ruiz Jr. versus Luis Ortiz at heavyweight for the WBC interim heavyweight title. I mean, this is a big fight. The winner was, basically, in line to fight Deontay Wilder, and the winner with, for the interim belt. So a lot of people wanted to see Andy Ruiz because Wilder had already beaten, Ortiz twice. It was a good action-packed fight. Ruiz technically got 3 knockdowns, but most people felt that Ortiz outboxed him. So a lot of people thought Ortiz was going to walk away with the win, and Andy Ruiz got a unanimous decision and captured the interim belt. So those are all our candidates from under 122 all the way to heavyweight. Now I got to give you my top 5. This is one of those awards where there's only a handful of fights that make it, so I'm going to give my top 5 on the year. Number 5 for most controversial was Daniel Jacobs against John Ryder. Again, this was a very good fight between the two, back and forth. Jacobs, was convincingly winning halfway through, maybe even into the 7th and 8th, and then John Ryder kicked it into gear, came back, very good, very close battle, and John Ryder walked away with a split decision. And you know what came from this controversy is Ryder went on to become the interim WBO champion, scoring a 5th round TKO over Zach Parker. That's probably going to get him a Canelo fight. So, you know, there was a lot that came from this one. So that one's number 5 on the year for me. Number 4 was Teofimo Lopez against Sandor Martin. You know, this one just because it was a good fight, you know, I mean, but it was one of those fights where the styles didn't make for a lot of like the Jacobs and Ryder fight. It was convincing that Jacobs was outboxing Ryder the first half of the fight and into the 7th and 8th rounds. And then it was convincing that Ryder was winning some of those other rounds. There were some close ones, don't get me wrong, but there was like clear-cut action where you could see who was pretty much winning, and it could have went either way. This one, it wasn't like that. You know, Lopez seemed to be doing more in terms of outworking Martin, but Martin seemed to be landing sometimes the clearer shots, and it was very hard to score this fight, which is why I think it was so close. So this one, and then just the reaction of Sandor Martin, and a lot of people looking at Lopez like, wow, you didn't do shit, you know? That one really made it controversial. So that one was number 4. Number 3 goes to Makabu and Mushunu. One, that was for the WBC Cruiserweight title. You know, it was only 1 or 2 in the top 5 that was actually for a legitimate world title. And, you know, Makabu coming in, you know, there's just, you know, a lot of people were just assuming that Makabu was going to win and Canelo was going to want to fight him after that. And everybody was really overlooking Mushunu, maybe because he got knocked out before, but Mushunu really was riding a hot wave, you know, over the last couple years heading into the fight. So Mushunu was really pumped up for this one, and a lot of people felt that he outboxed, he outworked Makabu in this one. But, you know, those Don King pay-per-views and fights, man, I don't know. It just seems like so much controversy comes out of them. And, you know, this was definitely a controversial fight because it ended in Makabu's favor. Canelo, you know, ended up signing that 2-fight deal. And, you know, obviously he wasn't impressed, and it kind of fell to the wayside. But I think the performance by Makabu and the fact that it was, you know, it wasn't a great fight. It was kind of an ugly but close fight. Really puts this one on the map and on the list. And also because more people definitely felt that Mushunu won this fight than Makabu, in my opinion, from what I've read and everything. Number 2 is Andy Ruiz versus Luis Ortiz. I was able to watch most of this fight, and for me, Ortiz was, you know, yeah, he stunned Andy, but he couldn't put him down. And Andy Ruiz scored a couple knockdowns, scored 3 knockdowns. You know, 2 of them I felt were probably legit. You could argue maybe the second one. You know, one of them was absolutely shouldn't have been scored a knockdown, and that affected the outcome. But I really feel this one was controversial because nobody wanted Luis Ortiz to win this fight. And why? Because the winner would be lined up to fight Wilder, and Ortiz had already been knocked out twice against Wilder. So, yeah, people would tune in for that. But do we want to see Wilder knock out a 43-year-old Ortiz again? Because that's pretty much what we believe would happen. He's already knocked him out twice. But the potential Wilder versus Andy Ruiz fight, the name versus the name, you know, kind of deal, big name fight right there. No matter what the outcome, those are 2 big names in the heavyweight division. And, you know, for the interim belt and lining yourself up for a showdown with Tyson Fury, that just brings so much to the table. You know, it's such a big deal for boxing. So I really felt like, you know, Ruiz went into this one where the judges were automatically, and everybody's automatically favoring this guy, overly favoring, and if it was close, he was going to get a decision. The knockdowns made it close, but I really felt like he got outboxed and still should have lost, but he walked away with the unanimous decision and the interim title, and nobody really said anything because it was almost that unspoken, oh, well, we're not going to say anything. We're just going to go with it because everybody wants to see Wilder and Ruiz. And that, to me, made it controversial. So it was a big fight. and a lot on the line, and I absolutely feel that this was a controversial decision. But the biggest controversy, the most controversial fight of the year, in my opinion, absolutely 100%, I'm convinced, is Josh Taylor versus Jack Catterall for the undisputed junior welterweight title. This one, Taylor was a massive favorite. The undisputed champion, had almost, he convincingly defeated Jose Ramirez last year to become undisputed champ. Taylor was just making another defense. It was supposed to be just a domestic fight to get a title defense in and to move up to 147. And he comes in against Catterall, who hadn't really beaten anybody credible to even become mandatory. And he was just seen as a domestic opponent for Taylor to get a big fight in his home country, And Catterall goes in there and probably should have won the fight. He scored a knockdown. He outworked Taylor. Taylor did some good work to make it close, somewhat close. But when it came back, they voted for Taylor. I mean, the judges came back and gave the fight to Taylor. And this fight was so controversial that Taylor, he walked away with the win and afterwards said, no rematch, I'm moving up to 147, we can fight there. Catterall said, no, I want to fight for the titles. And Taylor said, well, I don't know what to tell you. Then Taylor said he couldn't make his mind up. Then he said, all right, well, I'm going to move back down. I'm going to stay at 140 for a potential rematch with Taylor at some point or for a bigger fight. And I'm going to take on Jose Zepeda, my WBC mandatory. And then he ended up backing out and giving up 3 of his 4 belts to decide on a rematch because he was getting so much shit at home from fans about the way he looked. That's how controversial, when you can completely change your game up. And now Taylor is signed on to fight Catterall again. It was a long time coming to get the rematch made. So it's going to come about 13 months after the first fight, but they're going to do it again in March of this year. And again, Taylor gave up 3 of his 4 belts to fight Catterall again, to stay at 140. I mean, if that's not controversy right there, and then he said it, that the fans just were relentless on him. And that's why he's doing it. So if that ain't controversial, then I don't know what the hell is. So definitely for me, that is the most controversial fight of the year in 2022. Josh Taylor versus Jack Catterall for the undisputed junior welterweight title. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. This is my 2022 boxing awards. If you did, smash the like button, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel. I appreciate any and all support. This is True Boxing. You've been hit with the truth.